Picture this: beneath your skin, inside every cell of your body is a map. Not made of ink or paper, but of proteins, molecules, and ancient instructions. It's your DNA. And it doesn't just tell you what colour your eyes are, or how tall you might grow. It holds the echoes of deserts crossed under a burning sun, of forests stalked by predators, of seas charted by ancestors who didn't yet know how far the world stretched. Your DNA is a time machine, and it remembers things you've never seen. It carries the fingerprints of people long buried, their names forgotten, their faces lost to time, but their decisions, their movements, their courage live on in you. Roughly 50,000 years ago, something incredible happened. A group of anatomically modern humans, Homo sapiens, walked out of Africa. They didn't have maps. They didn't know what lay beyond the hills or across the horizon. But they walked anyway. Some followed rivers that ran like veins through ancient landscapes. Others pushed into deserts, braving sun-scorched silence. Some looked to the sea and launched themselves into the unknown on rafts made of hope and wood. That single exodus, small in number but massive in consequence, would change everything. Because from that moment forward, humanity would no longer be bound to one continent. Our species, for the first time, became planetary. And the proof of this journey isn't just buried in archaeological sites. It's in you. Geneticists today can trace those ancient footsteps through the strands of your DNA. Using mitochondrial markers passed down through mothers and Y chromosome signatures passed through fathers, scientists can piece together humanity's migration like a forensic puzzle scattered across continents and millennia. Whether your ancestors ended up in Scandinavia or Siberia, in the Andes or the Outback, the trail leads back to the same place, East Africa. We often imagine history as something distant, something that happened to other people. But your existence is a direct result of that migration. Every breath you take is a continuation of a journey that began 2,000 generations ago. You are biologically and historically a child of Exodus. But this wasn't a straight line or a triumphant march. It was survival, trial by nature, adaptation under pressure. Climate shifts scorched and flooded landscapes. Predators stalked humans through moonless nights. Many lineages vanished, whole tribes lost to famine, disease, or isolation. But some endured, and those who did passed on more than their genes. They passed on the story of human resilience. Inside your body there are fragments of Neanderthal DNA, echoes of an encounter in Europe or Asia where two species met and mingled. Some of us also carry traces of the enigmatic Denisovans, a sister species known mostly from a tooth and a finger bone, but whose genetic legacy lives on in modern populations of Southeast Asia and Oceania. These weren't just collisions, they were mergers, quiet, intimate events that shaped what it means to be human. And the story doesn't end there, because that migration, that bold step beyond the known world, would lay the foundation for everything to come. Every language spoken, every myth told, every stone shaped into a tool, every fire lit, every settlement built, they all trace back to that moment when a few hundred humans decided to leave home and see what else was out there. So when you stare into the mirror, you're not just seeing yourself, you're seeing Africa's children. You're seeing the descendants of wanderers, survivors, pioneers. You're seeing bloodlines wrapped in dust and time and destiny. This is not just their story, it's yours, and it's just beginning. The departure, leaving Africa. For hundreds of thousands of years, Africa was everything. It was home, it was cradle and crucible. The continent nurtured our species, Homo sapiens, through scorching droughts and lush abundance, through volcanoes, megafauna, and the silent passing of endless generations. Here, under African skies, our brains expanded, our tools sharpened, and our societies began to take shape. Tiny, fragile sparks of something new. Art, language, memory, ritual. The oldest known human fossils, from places like Omo Kibish, Jebel Irhoud, and Hertobori, trace a long line of evolution that spans over 300,000 years. In that time, we weren't alone. Other hominin species shared the landscape, and Homo naldi, Homo heidelbergensis, Homo erectus, all pieces of an evolutionary experiment in intelligence and adaptability. But around 50,000 to 70,000 years ago, something shifted. Something big. Maybe it was the climate. Ice ages came and went like tides. pulling forests into deserts and reshaping entire ecosystems. Maybe resources grew scarce, too many mouths, not enough game. Or maybe, just maybe, curiosity burned too hot to ignore. A few small groups began to leave, not in caravans, not in armies, in ones and twos, in families and bands, no more than a few hundred at a time. And when they left, they walked into a world no human had ever seen. They followed the Rift Valley, trailing game and foraging routes along ancient rivers. Some may have crossed through what is now Egypt and the Sinai Peninsula, entering the vast sweep of the Middle East. Others may have hugged the coastline, following the narrow corridor of land that connected Africa to southern Arabia, crossing at the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, a waterway that was at times just a few kilometres wide. Fewer than 1,000 people by most estimates. That's it. That's the seed. And from that small, fragile population, the entire non-African world would be populated. Today, geneticists call this event the out-of-Africa migration, and it's written in our DNA. Every person of non-African descent alive today carries a portion of the genetic legacy of that tiny founder group. Through mitochondrial DNA, passed down from mothers to children, and with chromosome markers passed through fathers, scientists can trace every bloodline back to a handful of ancestors who made the leap. But it wasn't a leap into safety. It was a journey into deep uncertainty. What did they see when they stepped out of the continent that birthed them? Mountains that scraped the sky, ice fields that clawed across the land, creatures they had never hunted, diseases their bodies had never faced, cold so profound it burned, nights darker than imagination. And yet, they kept moving, they adapted, they learned, they survived. These early migrants didn't just pass through Eurasia, they made it their home. Some moved east, pushing into India and Southeast Asia. Others travelled north, encountering Neanderthals in the caves of Europe. Still others sailed, yes, sailed, reaching the distant shores of Australia tens of thousands of years before boats were thought possible. Every mile they walked rewrote the story of what it meant to be human. Every obstacle, whether predator or glacier or starvation, was an exam that determined who got to stay in the gene pool. And your ancestors, they passed. It's easy to forget how improbable it all was, how delicate our beginnings were outside of Africa. A few hundred people in a world filled with danger, with no guarantees and no maps, just instincts, stone tools, and each other. That you're here, reading this, is proof that they succeeded. So the next time someone says the world is too vast, too uncertain, too hard, remember this. Your ancestors stepped out of the only home they had ever known, and they kept walking until they had circled the globe. They weren't just survivors, they were explorers, and their footprints are still inside you. Genetic breadcrumbs, tracing the journey. Modern genetics reveals shared markers in people from Asia, Europe, the Americas, all pointing back to that single exodus. Mitochondrial DNA and Y chromosome haplogroups allow scientists to trace ancient paths. These are not myths, they are biological facts written in our blood. Your skin may be light or dark, your eyes may be green, brown, almond-shaped or wide and round. You might speak Spanish, Mandarin, Hausa or Navajo, but the blood running beneath your skin, it speaks a much older language, one that remembers the time when all humans stood in the same place, staring out at the unknown. Your DNA carries the echoes of that moment. Geneticists call them markers. Mutations, tiny spelling mistakes in our DNA, passed down through generations like family heirlooms. They're not flaws, they're flags. Waypoints, coordinates on an ancient map we didn't know we were carrying. Mitochondrial DNA, passed from mother to child, forms an unbroken maternal line, stretching back tens of thousands of years. It whispers the tale of a woman known only by science as mitochondrial Eve, not the first woman, not the only woman, but the one whose daughters survived and whose legacy endures in all of us. The Y chromosome, handed from father to son, tells a parallel tale, a paternal echo, another line, another breadcrumb. Together these markers form the latticework of ancestry, the threads of the Great Migration. And when scientists followed these threads backwards, they all converged, not in Europe, not in Asia, but in Africa. A single departure, one exit, a narrow window in time between 50,000 and 70,000 years ago. when fewer than 1,000 people walked away from their homeland, carrying nothing but stone tools, stories, and the genetic seeds of the future. They didn't know they were changing history. They didn't know that their descendants would one day ride horses across the Mongolian steppe, carve gods into sandstone cliffs, launch spacecraft into the stars, and argue about politics on glowing glass screens. All they knew was survival. But survival leaves fingerprints. And now, thousands of years later, geneticists in white labs, working with samples from every corner of the Earth, from remote Andean villages to crowded megacities, are uncovering the proof. The pattern is undeniable. Every non-African human alive today can trace their lineage to that original exodus. Your ancestors crossed deserts, skirted coastlines, hunted mammoths on icy tundra, and slept beneath alien skies. They were not mythical heroes. They were real. Their DNA is your DNA. Their choices shaped your world. This isn't a myth handed down by firelight. This is data. This is science. But still, there's a kind of poetry in it. That inside every one of us, no matter how far we've drifted, there's a trace of the same fire, the same courage, the same footsteps echoing forward from a small band of humans who looked at the vastness beyond the savannah and said, "Let's go." We are the result of that journey. And every time a child is born, in Paris, in Delhi, in Lima, in Nairobi, a piece of that ancient departure is reborn too. The story continues. The map grows longer, but the trailhead remains the same. Africa, home, the place we all began and your blood remembers. Into the unknown, facing extinction and survival. They didn't know where they were going. There were no maps, no roads, no promises. Just a sun that burned too hot by day and a sky that offered no answers by night. These early humans, our ancestors, walked into the unknown with nothing but sharp minds, simple tools, and an unrelenting will to survive. This was not an age of abundance, it was an age of risk. The first out-of-Africa migrants encountered landscapes that tested every cell of their being. They crossed searing deserts where water was a memory. They climbed unfamiliar highlands with lungs that gasped for air. They battled strange diseases their immune systems had never known. And the predators, always watching. Giant hyenas, saber-toothed cats, and venomous snakes were not relics of fantasy. They were neighbours. And they hunted too. It wasn't a straight line, it wasn't inevitable. The genetic record tells us the truth most history books leave out. Humanity almost didn't make it. There were moments, maybe entire generations, when the human population dipped to just a few thousand, maybe fewer. A genetic bottleneck. You can see it in your DNA. Certain alleles, certain combinations, repeating again and again across the world. A sign that once, the diversity of humankind narrowed to a razor-thin thread. One misstep, one bad season, one more drought, and we wouldn't be here. But something extraordinary happened. Adaptation. Small groups huddled together and shared knowledge. They found new ways to hunt, to store food, to build shelter. They learned to read the stars and follow the seasons. Fire wasn't just warmth, it was safety, strategy, and sacred ritual. Stone wasn't just hard, it was shaped, sharpened, and passed from hand to hand like wisdom. Every innovation was born of desperation. A sharper spear meant one more day fed. A tighter circle around the fire meant one less child lost in the night. Language, still primitive, still forming, so became a survival tool. A grunt, a gesture, a rhythm etched in breath. The earliest symphonies of survival. These were not conquerors, they were survivors. They didn't know they were changing the world, but they were. With every step away from the cradle of Africa, they redrew the map of human destiny, not with flags or empires, but with footprints, fire pits, and buried bones. And in the marrow of those bones we can still read their story. Today, we look back and marvel at their courage. But they weren't thinking about legacy. They were thinking about the next meal, the next shelter, the next child. They faced extinction and refused to vanish. That stubbornness, that ingenuity, that sheer refusal to give up, it's still in you. Hidden behind your job title and your grocery list, under the hum of your modern life beats the heart of a creature forged in hardship. The journey into the unknown was not a heroic epic. It was a brutal gamble. And somehow, we won. But the cost? It's written in every lost tribe, every forgotten path, every empty cave where no fire ever burned again. This was the chapter where we nearly disappeared, but we didn't, and that changed everything. The Neanderthal encounter. The wind bit colder in Eurasia. Forests stretched like endless green cathedrals. Caves breathed with ancient breath. And there, in the shadows, we met them. They were not monsters, not beasts, but kin. The Neanderthals had been here long before us, weathered, powerful, attuned to the land. Stockier bodies, deeper voices, tools worn smooth by generations. Their eyes held stories of glacial winds, of mammoth hunts and winter fires. They were survivors of ice and stone, and we, the newcomers, arrived like whispers on the wind. Strangers shaped by sun and savanna, with lighter builds and minds tuned for abstraction. We brought our own fire, but we found theirs already burning. What happened next wasn't conquest, it wasn't war, it was something more human. Something quiet. We touched, we learned, we lived together. And in the spaces between stories and starlight, we mated. Their blood runs in our veins still. Almost every non-African alive today carries echoes of Neanderthal ancestors. 1 to 4% of their DNA woven silently into our genomes. In skin, in hair, in immune responses, they left their imprint. This was not a merging of nations, but of species. 2 branches of the human tree intertwining briefly before one faded into memory. Neanderthals did not vanish instantly, they dwindled. Outcompeted perhaps, outnumbered certainly, but not erased. Their stories didn't end, they changed form. They live on in us, in the way we fight disease, in the shape of our skulls, in genes that whisper of cold climates and strong bones. For years we imagined a violent clash, clubs against spears, cave against fire. But the genome tells a different story, a quieter one, a human one. Because when 2 peoples meet, the first instinct is not always to destroy. Sometimes it is to reach out. And what was born from that reaching is the legacy we carry. Not just sapiens, but part Neanderthal, part ancestor of a different kind. So when we think of us and them, of old and other, remember this. The lines are not clean, the borders are not sharp, and evolution does not obey politics. We were not alone in the beginning, and we are not one pure thing. We are a tapestry, woven from many threads. Each meeting in the wilderness left its mark. Each crossing of paths shaped who we became. And the Neanderthals, they were not left behind. They walk with us still, in violent, in shadow, in blood. The Denisovan mystery. In the vast silence of Ice Age Asia, another ancient face watched the stars. They are ghosts now, not just forgotten, but barely known. The Denisovans. We never found their skulls, never saw their art scratched in stone or bone. But in 2010, from a finger bone in a Siberian cave, the past whispered, a new kind of human, not us, not Neanderthal, something else. They left no known monuments, no known myths, and yet they live in us still, especially in the bloodlines of Melanesians, Aboriginal Australians and scattered Southeast Asian populations. Up to 5% of their DNA pulses in these communities, a ghost language, written in genes, not words, a trace from a long-lost cousin who never said goodbye. We don't know what they looked like. Their faces are a mystery, but their legacy is real. One of their gifts, a gene for high-altitude survival, and found today in the people of Tibet who thrive where oxygen thins and others struggle. This isn't science fiction, it's science. We didn't just battle the unknown, we merged with it, interbred, adapted, and changed. Their blood became our blood. Their strength in thin air, ours. Their resistance to unknown pathogens, ours. Their extinction, not total. Unlike the Neanderthals, whose remains are found from France to Iraq, the Denisovans are whispers, a molar here, a fragment there, but what bones couldn't say, DNA did. The Denisovan genome tells a story of branching paths, of parallel evolution, of a meeting in the mists, not of empires or cities, but of shared breath in the dark forests of prehistory. It wasn't war, it was blending. The stitching of 2 distant threads into a single tapestry. That's the truth our DNA reveals. Humanity has always been more mixed than myth says. We are not pure, we are not singular, we are the children of many shadows, many names. The Denisovans didn't vanish, not entirely. Their memory walks in the veins of millions, unnoticed, unspoken, but not unimportant. They remind us that every migration left fingerprints, that every encounter changed us, that who we are is more than one story, it's a chorus. And perhaps the real mystery is not them, but how much of us they became. Crossing water, the first ocean voyages. They say humans walked out of Africa, but they forget. We also sailed, long before maps, before sextants and sails, before the word ocean was whispered. We crossed it. At least 45,000 years ago, our ancestors reached Australia. Let that sink in. Australia. A land that has always been apart, cut off by seas distant and wild. This wasn't a casual stroll. No land bridge connected Southeast Asia to that vast island continent. No accidental driftwood would have brought an entire people. They had to build something, plan something, launch out over blue water with no certainty of what lay ahead. This wasn't survival by fire or stone. This was survival by imagination. And that changes everything, because it means the first ocean voyagers, the first mariners, were not Bronze Age empires or classical explorers. They were barefoot hunter-gatherers, guided not by compasses, but by stars, birds, clouds, and courage. Boats, rafts, maybe stitched bark canoes or floating bundles of reeds and hope. We don't have the wreckage, but we have the destination, and that's enough. Reaching Sahul, the prehistoric supercontinent that once joined Australia, Tasmania, and New Guinea, meant navigating over 100 kilometres of open water, even at Ice Age sea levels. This wasn't a one-time leap. It required planning, group coordination, and perhaps most shockingly, language. You don't build a seaworthy craft without sharing knowledge. You don't launch a voyage without discussing winds, tides, supplies, and survival. And you don't cross 100 kilometres of ocean unless you dream something bigger than the horizon. We often think of early humans as frightened of the unknown, cowering in caves, waiting for storms to pass. But this chapter tells another story, of humans who stood at the edge of land, watched the sun melt into the waves, and chose to follow it. What kind of people do that? People who believed that beyond the water there was more land, more life, more chance, and they were right. When they reached Sahul, they found strange beasts, giant wombats, towering birds, marsupial lions. They built new lives, formed new cultures, and stayed. Some of the descendants of those first voyagers still live in Australia today, Aboriginal Australians, among the world's oldest continuous cultures, carrying echoes of that ancient crossing in their stories, art, and DNA. The sea didn't stop us. It shaped us. It made us storytellers, map-makers of the mind, risk-takers in skin and bone. This chapter isn't just about boats. It's about a mindset, the same spark that would one day send us to the moon. Once sent us into the waves with nothing but instinct and wood. We don't remember their names. We don't know what they said before stepping onto that first raft. But somewhere in the deep silence of prehistory, someone pointed to the water and said, "Let's go." And they did. And so the myth that we only walked is broken. We didn't just follow rivers. We didn't only trace the coastlines, we crossed them. The ocean to us was not a wall. It was a bridge. And long before the age of sail, long before Columbus or Magellan, we became seafarers. Not just survivors, explorers, genes and climate, how we adapted. Migration didn't just move us across land and sea, it transformed us. As early humans stepped out of Africa and into unfamiliar worlds, their DNA began rewriting itself in response to cold winds, high altitudes, strange foods, and the slant of unfamiliar suns. We didn't just survive, we became something new. In the sun-rich tropics of Africa, dark melanin-rich skin protected our ancestors from ultraviolet radiation, nature's armour against a blazing sky. But when our journey took us north, into the misty forests and pale winter light of Europe and Asia, something changed. In those dim latitudes, sunlight was scarce, and vitamin D became a rare, precious resource. So skin lightened, slowly, over generations, not for beauty, not for fashion, for survival. It allowed more UV rays to be absorbed, helping bodies synthesize the vitamin D they needed to build bones and sustain life. And that wasn't the only shift. In the Arctic, where winter was a way of life and the cold bit through layers of fur and hide, the bodies of migrating humans began to favour fat retention. Thicker builds, broader noses to warm icy air before it reached the lungs. Genes that helped conserve heat became crucial. These adaptations weren't conscious choices, they were subtle edits, written by time and necessity into our chromosomes. In high mountain plateaus, where oxygen is thin and air pressure low, the genes of those with Denisovan ancestry proved invaluable. The people of the Tibetan Plateau today carry genetic traces that allow them to breathe efficiently at altitudes that would leave others gasping. These aren't just facts from a textbook, they're living echoes of ancient contact, ancient adaptation. Even our diets left a mark. As humans settled and began herding animals, some societies leaned heavily on milk as a food source. In those regions, a genetic mutation emerged, the ability to digest lactose into adulthood. Something most mammals lose after weaning. But not us, not in northern Europe, East Africa, and a few other pockets around the world. There, a tiny tweak in day changed everything, turning milk from poison to nourishment. This wasn't evolution over millions of years. This was rapid, sharp, just tens of thousands. A blink, geologically speaking, but long enough to forge new skin tones, new body shapes, and new metabolisms. It's easy to imagine our ancestors as static, unchanging figures, but the truth is far more dynamic. We were works in progress. We are works in progress. Every footstep across a frozen plain, every adaptation to a new food or climate, etched something deeper into us than memory. It etched code. Code that still lives in you, in all of us. When you see a stranger across the street or across the ocean, remember, your DNA once walked beside theirs, faced the same storms, learned the same lessons in different ways. Evolution didn't just shape how we look, it shaped how we endured, and it continues with every new challenge we face. Echoes in the genome, modern humans' ancient roots. The human body is a relic, a living fossil made not of stone but of memory and adaptation. It remembers, not with thought, but with code. Hidden in the double helix of your DNA are echoes of sandstorms, ice sheets, and endless migrations. It carries the whispers of those who once walked the savannas, crossed tundras, and stared into the dark mouths of caves with fire in their hands and fear in their hearts. We think of ourselves as modern, but beneath the surface we are anything but new. Every cell in your body is a library of survival strategies written by your ancestors, honed not over centuries, but over tens of thousands of years. You carry their legacy in the smallest details of your biology. That mutation that lets you digest milk into adulthood, a gift from ancestors who herded cattle and drank their milk in grassy plains. Your skin, adapted for the sunlight, or lack of it, depending on the latitude your bloodline passed through. The pigment in your eyes, the way your body holds fat or burns it, even your sleep cycles and how your immune system responds to specific diseases, all sculpted by environments your ancient kin once dared to face. Some of these traces are obvious, but many are quiet. A resistance to malaria here, a higher tolerance for oxygen in high altitudes there. These weren't conscious choices, they were necessities, etched into the genome by the pressure of nature and the passage of time. Those who didn't carry the right variants didn't make it. Those who did became us. What's more astonishing is how small the population bottleneck was. After leaving Africa, our species shrank to a dangerously tiny number. Some estimates say fewer than 2,000 people. That's not a civilization, that's a village. And yet, from that genetic seed grew every culture, every language, every face on Earth today. And your genome carries this journey. Scientists can read it like a map. They can see the Neanderthal code in your immune system, inherited from ancient liaisons in the cold forests of Eurasia. They can find Denisovan genes in Tibetans that help blood bind to oxygen, a trait born in mountain ranges long before any flag was planted there. These aren't just curiosities, they are proof. Proof that we didn't just spread across the world, we merged with it. We listened to its demands and let it mold us, and in return, it gave us resilience. The genome you carry is not just yours, it's a chorus of ancestors singing softly through your cells. And so, when you wonder who you are, look within. The answer isn't just cultural or personal, it's molecular. You are the child of survivors, the descendant of 1,000 adaptations, the product of courage and chance, time and tenacity. You are ancient and utterly alive. We are all migrants. We like to draw lines, on maps, in minds, between us and them. But the body remembers no such boundaries. Beneath skin and flag and language lies a truth older than any nation. We are all migrants. There are no pure humans, only mosaics, walking tapestries stitched together from countless crossings and couplings, from ancient paths that braided through forests, deserts, and frozen frontiers. You are not from one place, you are from 1,000 places, carried forward by 1,000 feet, 1,000 choices, 1,000 chances. Your DNA does not recognize borders. It does not know empire or passport or ancestry test kits. It knows only what it needed to survive. It knows the heat of the African sun, the cold bite of glacial winds, the hunger of lean winters, and the thrill of a hunt that meant the difference between life and silence. You carry pieces of everyone who came before, and not just their blood, but their hope. The hope that the next hill would have food, that the next valley would be safe, that the children would live long enough to tell stories. And they did. You're here. That is the story. This ancient migration to you, the one that began 50,000 years ago with footsteps out of Africa, was not a march of conquest, but one of necessity, curiosity, desperation, wonder. Some walked, some stayed, some vanished, some survived. But together they seeded the earth with the only species that tells stories about where it came from. And the most shocking part? Not that it happened, but that it worked. They could have perished. The climate was brutal, the predators fierce, the distances enormous. And yet generation after generation they moved forward. They adapted. They formed bonds. They shared knowledge. They birthed languages. They buried their dead with care. They carved meaning into stone and bone in each other's memories. You are their legacy, living, breathing proof that the impossible was done not once, but endlessly. Every time a parent whispered advice, a hunter shared food, a child took a step into the unknown, the migration continued. So next time someone talks of us and them, remember, the line between isn't real. The blood knows better. It remembers a time before nations, before races, before walls and wars and the illusion of separation. In the long view of time, we are all the same story, told in different voices. We are all migrants, each of us a chapter in the longest journey ever taken. And somehow, despite every obstacle, the story goes on. Through you,